Congressman Stewart, thank you so much for speaking with Voice of America.
Yeah, we're happy to be with you again.
You were part of a congressional delegation to China led by Senator Daines. What was the purpose of the trip, and what were the topic of discussion?
Primarily trade, but from my perspective, because I sit on the House Intelligence Committee, we wanted to talk about some of the intel issues as well, particularly, no surprise, North Korea. Things have settled down there a little bit, but this is, 3 weeks or a month ago, and of course it was very, very intense at that moment, and we wanted to see, if China was willing to help us in ways they hadn't been in the past, Japan as well. And I actually left the region much more encouraged than I've been in quite a while regarding North Korea.
This past weekend, North Korea just conducted a successful missile test. And what is your thought on that? You were a former Air Force pilot.
Yeah.
How do you think that the U.S. should handle this crisis?
Well, I tell you what hasn't worked, and that is this idea of strategic patience. That goes back to when I was in the military in the 1990s. It started with President Clinton. It went through President Bush and President Obama. And our objective has always been two things: to stop North Korean missile program and to stop their nuclear program. And if that's been our objective, then very clearly this policy has failed because we haven't done either one. But President Trump has said, and I think he's exactly right on this, he says we will not allow North Korea to have nuclear-tipped ICBMs that are able to reach the United States. And it wouldn't be just one city, it would be dozens of cities that they could threaten. And so once again, if you'd asked me a year ago, can we stop that from happening? I don't know that I would have been able to say yes. But I'm much more encouraged now than I've been in the past. China is engaging in ways they haven't. The very senior Chinese leadership has said, we recognize that we can be more assertive and play a more positive role in this. Japan as well, all of the allies in the region, even the Philippines, who a year ago seemed to be turning entirely towards China, even they are taking a step back. And I think there's a coalition building there that we can actually maybe change their trajectory and have a good outcome for us.
Back to trade. I know that during this visit, Senator Daines hand-carried 4 Montana steak to Chinese Premier Li Keqiang to underscore the importance of opening Chinese market to U.S. beef. What was the interaction like?
It was actually really quite pleasant. It was fun, and it was kind of funny. It's hard to get frozen steaks from Washington, D.C. to Beijing and keep them frozen. It was kind of a challenge, but I think he was a little surprised. But it was a good symbology of, we have this great U.S. beef. Senator Daines, of course, is from Montana. He kind of kids around saying there's 3 times as many cows in his district than there are people. But it's an important issue for not just, people in Montana, people in Utah, people throughout the West, but the beef industry is an enormous industry in the country, and China's an enormous market. That market has been closed to us up to this point. And it's a real positive step forward for China to open the markets for us on beef.
So U.S. and China has reached a trade deal after the visit that the Chinese will open markets for U.S. beef, financial services, and natural gas, and also the Americans will the American market will be open to Chinese cooked chicken.
Yeah.
What does this trade deal mean for your constituents?
Well, as looking at rural Utah, for example, where we have thousands and thousands of ranchers. I grew up ranching and milking cows and raising beef, and it's a big deal for my district. It's a big deal for the West generally. It's really a win-win. It's a positive thing for the Chinese people. It's a positive thing for the American people. We have closer ties. We have closer economic relationships. The Chinese people get to have our great American beef. And again, I think it's kind of a win-win for everyone.
It's been 4 months since President Trump took office, and this week one of the biggest news in D.C. is that President Trump may have shared classified information with Russian officials. Yeah. As a member of the House Intelligence Committee, what is your reaction to this controversy?
Yeah, anytime a president would be accused of threatening or endangering our security, that would be a very enormous concern. But the truth is that I don't think that happened. Mr. Tillerson was there. He is adamant, and his statements are very clear. There was no improper information that was shared. General McMaster's was there in the meeting. He was adamant, and he's very explicit. There was no improper information that was shared. And it bothers me, frankly, that we have this situation where people who weren't in the meeting, and then they anonymously go talk to the press. And I think this is a really important point. I think that these individuals have done more to harm our national security by going to the press and revealing details. I mean, some of the things that they said are really quite sensitive. I think that's much more harmful than the president sharing what information he shared with Russia, which was aviation related and about how to protect passengers. And once again, Mr. McMaster's and Mr. Tillerson have both said nothing improper was said there.
So far, what is your reaction to President Trump's handling with U.S.-China relations?
I think it's actually been quite positive. You know, he had Premier Xi down to Mar-a-Lago. They apparently had some great meetings down there. They seem to have developed a friendship. When I was in China, we were greeted very warmly. It was actually the same weekend that the president had his meetings. And their response to it was really quite positive. And I think that helped move things forward in a lot of different areas in ways that we've talked about here today. I think it engages them more in the challenge of North Korea. It engaged them more in free trade and opening up markets between the two of us. And it's so important for us to have a good relationship with China. I mean, we've been concerned with some of their activities in the South China Sea, some of those things over the last few years. But we're more able to engage and to change the outcome of those stresses between us if the president and the Chinese leadership have a good relationship.
Lastly, what is your hope for this relationship going forward?
You know, I had this interesting conversation with some of the Chinese leadership, including President Xi and Premier Li. And it's this historical theory that when you have a rising power and then an established power, that as that happens over time, that those two will always come into conflict. And you look back throughout world history, that seems to be the case. And I present that idea to them and say, how do we stop that from happening? We can't have our two countries become enemies. We can't have, you know, aggression or war break out between us as we kind of battle for our spheres of influences. And the Chinese leadership is very clear with us. They don't want that. The United States clearly doesn't want that. But we do have different interests in some cases, and it's very important for us to be able to discuss those differences in a very honest way, but in a way that doesn't challenge each other, in a way that doesn't make things worse. And I think by and large we've been able to do that. Most of us hope that we'll continue to be able to do that in the future.
Thank you so much, Congressman
Stewart.
Great to be with you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
It's always fun. Thank you.
Yeah.